Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your lead analyst and host, Elliot Clough, at Elliot Clough on Twitter, joined as always by managing editor Ross Binder here on this Wednesday morning. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment there, and of course, subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So, news on Monday morning in Hawkeye land, Hawkeye world. Um, Ladell Betts moving on to the NFL, taking the running backs coach job with the New York Giants after being with the Hawkeyes since 2021. Ross, I know that came as a surprise to both of us. He's been a fixture on the staff for the last few years. Obviously, done a really good job, especially with Caleb Johnson coming off a record-breaking season. What were your initial thoughts or reactions when that news came out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was both a surprise and also kind of not a surprise. And what I mean by that is that obviously the timing was a surprise because we had no inkling that he was, looking to move or anything like that. It was not surprising to me that Betts would be in demand because he's done, like you said, he's done a really good job in the 4 years he's been at Iowa City, at Iowa, in Iowa City. And, he's coming off the phenomenal year with Caleb Johnson who was, Iowa led the Big Ten in rushing. That a lot of credit for that to other coaches too, like Lester and Barnett and everything. But the running backs are the guys picking up those yards too. So obviously, Betts deserves his flowers there. And he put together a great room. They were super productive. Caleb Johnson had one of the best seasons we've seen an Iowa running back ever have at Iowa. He was on pace to frankly shatter Sean Green's single season rushing record, partway through the season. He kind of dipped towards the end of the season. Iowa hit some tougher run defenses, and I think some of the issues with the quarterback slowed things down in the run game too. But still had a phenomenal season, broke records for touchdowns. Kind of single-handedly won up that Nebraska game, right? I mean, that just insane touchdown Caleb had. And that all flows back to Liddell and the job he did. He was a outstanding player long before your time, Elliott. But when Kirk Ferentz started at Iowa, Ladell Betts was his running back, and he rode him. He was the best player Iowa had for quite a few years, honestly. And he was super productive. A great Hawkeye during those years. Came back and really did well as a position coach too. The running back production the last few years has been really solid, and obviously this year it was absolutely phenomenal. So, wish him the best of luck, but it definitely leaves Iowa in a kind of a scramble situation. I don't know that they were anticipating, or certainly we were not anticipating from the outside.
Right. And this is the second season in a row they've had to make a pretty important hire. Obviously, offensive coordinator, a little bit more important than running backs coach, but at the same time, a hire that had to be made. And that one took a lot longer than I thought it should have. And I think a lot of us thought it should have. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't blame the fan base if they were a little nervous at this point. Again, Kirk presumably took his time because of bowl prep for a game that they lost 35-0. And then because he wanted to make the right hire. And I think he did make the right hire with Tim Lester. But then again, when it comes to this running backs coach position, spring practice starts in a month. Who are you
yeah.
going
The
to have in?
timing is not really ideal. The main coaching hiring cycle is in January and December. So, we're through that. Spring practice starts, like you said, in a month. So you want to get somebody locked in before that. So you are kind of on I would say in a not a rush necessarily, but you've got an expedited time frame here. You got to pick up the pace and get somebody hired pretty quick here.
And additionally, there's a they've had one big junior day. They're going to have another at the start of March. Are you going to have a coach by then for the running backs? Because if you're a running back and you show up and there's nobody there, you're like, But at the same time, I don't see Kirk nor the staff at Iowa being that nervous about it because somebody will inevitably fill that position, right? And in the
Yeah.
meantime, you have Tim Lester there. You have Tim
Yep.
Lester there. You have graduate assistants. You have like guys like Keller Christ. You have the recruiting staff and Rhett Smeens and Spalding and Tyler Barnes and Matt Spalding and so I wouldn't worry about it that much. At the same time, you'd prefer to have a running backs coach if you're going to have running backs on campus. And
Absolutely.
in that same vein, I think it's important to talk about recruiting with Liddell because he was so good at it.
Yeah.
Um, but with that said, I think we need to talk about maybe the reasoning for him leaving first rather than, what I was losing. Because the question was raised on our board. And my initial thoughts on that front were, "Oh, it's the NFL," like, right? And at the same time, there's not a huge pay difference between NFL coaching spots in position coaches and college position coaches. There's probably not a ton of job security with the New York Giants under Brian Daboll, who might get fired to start. If they have
I
a
mean,
bad start, he might be gone.
he's going to enter next season with one of the hottest seats in the NFL for sure. So,
Exactly. And if he's gone, then, at the end of the season, then Liddell will presumably be gone as well. And he'll either have to find another job in the NFL or find another job in college. And, that won't be difficult for him, presumably, because he's had so much success at a place like Iowa. But additionally, this is a resume builder for if a guy who wants to be more than just a running backs coach, then this is going to be really positive for him. This is you look at a resume and you don't only see high school head coach, you don't only see he coached at his alma mater, but you see the New York Giants on there. And
yeah.
whether the Giants are good or bad, I mean, even if he goes in there and improves it a little bit, there are so many other factors that go into that coaching job at the NFL. So I mean, you're talking about recruiting. He doesn't have to recruit. That is
Yeah.
such a positive that people don't generally think of when you go from college to the NFL. You just get dudes, right? And you can just coach ball. And that's there are some coaches that vehemently dislike recruiting. Ladell Betts not one of them, as far as I know. But this is, I mean, to me, you look at that and you think, oh, I just get to coach ball. I don't have to do all the extra stuff with high school kids.
Yep.
That's a win, and that's something off your plate, right? And if there was a time for him to make this move, probably right now, considering, well, I mean, not right now as in February, as in this part of the coaching cycle, but right now in his career, after a phenomenal year by his top running back in Caleb Johnson. Like if there was a time for him to take advantage of the heat that he has in the coaching world, it's right now.
Absolutely. His stock as a running backs coach, it's going to be hard to be hotter than it is right now because he just had, like we said, Caleb had one of the best seasons an Iowa running back has ever had. He probably wins the Doak Walker and maybe he's even a Heisman finalist. If not for Ashton, Genty just having a, just world class, record shattering season out in Boise. So, it's tough when that happens for another running back to get the same attention, obviously. But yeah, so I think you're right. His stock is high, really high right now. It's a resume builder. I think it's also, a really big networking opportunity for him in terms of the coaching ranks. You mentioned the Giants, obviously Daboll's on the hot seat, and who knows what's going to happen with them next year. Their offensive coordinator is Mike Kafka, who is a really, highly regarded coordinator. He was, considered for some head coaching jobs in the NFL this season. So he seems like a coach whose stock is on the rise. If Liddell kind of meshes with him, maybe that's a guy that, if Kafka, takes another job next year or something, maybe Betts follows him or something. So, and there's just a lot of opportunities to, network with other NFL coaches at that level, obviously. And, like you said, if things don't work out at the Giants next year, which is probably a higher than average possibility, considering how not good they were this year and everything. So, it is certainly not the most stable situation to be going into, but I think he can still come out of it on the other side with a lot of positives for sure.
Shadur Sanders to the rescue in New York. How about that? Well, we'll see.
Yeah,
Uh, imagine, imagine Caleb Johnson falls in the second round, assuming he goes in the second round. I think that's usually where a lot of people think he's going to go. He goes to New York, pairs up with Betts again. That'd be fun. That'd be
that'd be
cool.
really fun. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Additionally, a few other Hawkeyes on the roster in New York right now. Amir Smith-Marset, Tyrone Tracy, who's now running back after playing wide receiver at Iowa. Um, there's another one or two that I'm missing in there. I wrote about it, but couple.
Amir Smith-Marset, I
Yeah,
think
I said it.
was
Yeah, I said that
okay.
one. But anyway, some solid former Hawkeyes that he's meeting up with there.
There's
So
also two
cool.
Ferences on the Giants staff already. Kirk's sons, James is an assistant O-line coach, and Steve is a defensive assistant. So, he's going to know a few guys there, I'm sure already.
Dane Belton was the other one I was thinking of.
Belton,
Yeah.
yes.
There's also a long snapper, I think before my time, Casey Kreiter.
Yeah, yeah, he was a long snapper a few years ago.
Okay.
I mean, he's very good. He's carved out a nice little career in the NFL, so that's nice for him.
Yeah, there you go. Now, as far as how this affects Iowa, being that recruiting is under my umbrella, this was something that I initially thought of because also, I mean, maybe mainly because Ladell is such a good recruiter, and he recruits Florida, and Florida is a hotbed for college football talent, and he doesn't just recruit running backs down there either. You know, Jaz Patterson, Kamari Moulton, um, Nathan McNeil, who is a freshman and enrolled early. He started the relationship with Rashad Godfrey, started the relationship with Jerry Bowie, started relationships with other targets that may have not ended up at Iowa, but considered Iowa because of a recruit or an area recruiter like Ladell Betts. Um, and Iowa does still have connections to Florida by way of Abdul Hodge, who's originally from Fort Lauderdale. But to have two connections down there is better than one, and that's just math, right? But the the fact that Iowa got some really solid talent out of the state and will, you know, for Iowa, hope they continue to do so. Losing such a strong recruiter in that area is tough. And I mean, looking at the entire picture of what Liddell is, too, you got a former NFL running back, you got an Iowa alum who had success at Iowa, you have a coach that did what he did with Caleb Johnson. I mean, like it's just like a perfect trifecta of what you
He
want.
he really ticked all the boxes. Yeah. I mean, he had a great Iowa career. He had a really solid NFL career. I mean, he lasted a long time. He wasn't like a star, but he was a really solid, productive running back there. Had a great, coaching career at Iowa, like you said, especially off this last year with Caleb. Yeah, like he ticked all the boxes you want out of, especially a position coach. I mean, just really phenomenal.
And one thing we routinely heard from guys like Caleb Johnson, guys like Jaz Patterson and Kamari Moulton for that matter, was how he held that room together and
Yeah.
was a father figure, so to speak. And one thing I wrote about in my three thoughts column after this all came together was that I think we all expected a running back to transfer after the 2023 season between Caleb Johnson, who wasn't Caleb Johnson, his sophomore season, Kamari Moulton, Jaz Patterson, TJ Washington, LeSean Williams was still part of that group. Five guys that were expected, or not, maybe not expected, but could contribute in 24, and none of them transferred after the spring. LeSean ultimately did partway through, well, entered the portal partway through the 24 season, dealing with injuries, all that stuff. But now they lose their leading rusher from the last three seasons, Caleb Johnson, LeSean Williams, Caleb Johnson, and the room is still stacked, right? Like you still got Jaz Patterson, you still got Kamari Moulton, you still got TJ Washington, and then you look at this group of freshmen from this last year in Brevin Dahl and Xavier Williams, and Kirk Ferentz said it himself. He could have seen him play, seen them play in the bowl game. And I spoke to another source prior to the bowl game that said that they wouldn't have been surprised either. And I think Brevin Dahl has a really high ceiling going forward, not only as a running back, but as a return man. He very well could replace Max White on kickoffs this coming year. Who knows, right? Not going to call anything like that now, but this is a room that is loaded. And Ladell not only got a stud like Jaz Patterson, who had offers from Oregon, Alabama, Penn State, bunch of really high profile programs. He got a Kamari Moulton, who was previously committed to Florida Atlantic, and then turned him into at one point running RB1. Like this
Yeah,
is he's the whole picture in terms of development, in terms of getting guys that are highly recruited. I mean, it's just I mean, tough to beat a dead horse here, but it's tough to replace that kind of person, that kind of versatility as a coach. And I mean, maybe this is a move for down the road in his coaching career, in that maybe he comes back to Iowa at some point as an OC. Maybe he wants to be considered as a potential replacement for Kirk Ferentz, right?
yeah,
I mean, and this is an excellent opportunity to do so. And just to keep on track with what I was saying, the ability to identify talent and recruit talent in a such a hotbed like Florida is really important. In looking at potential candidates, which we'll talk about here momentarily, I don't, it's going to be hard to replicate that. It's going to be really hard to replicate everything that Liddell did at
yeah,
Iowa.
absolutely. Yeah, and going back to one thing you mentioned, I think his ability to keep all those guys happy in the running back room is a really just tremendous accomplishment because they all want the ball, they all want carries, everybody wants to be fed. Keeping that all on an even keel is not easy. And like you said, he did it last year. There were no transfers out of the program after that 23 season, even when it looked like for sure something would have to give. And then this year, Le'Shawn entered the portal and Caleb's going pro. So that's going to ease things up a little bit. But, he's done a phenomenal job of navigating that issue and keeping multiple guys happy and making sure that we've seen positions where Iowa is not well stocked, and when injuries hit, it's like, oh boy, it's getting a little dicey here. Running back is not one of those situations. We've seen it where when bad things happen, and they've been able to plug in different guys and really still see success. So that's a big credit to what he's done, and yeah, it leaves some really big shoes for his replacement to fill.
At the same time, credit to Tim Lester too, because the run game exploded this season, not just because of Caleb Johnson, not just because of Ladell Betts, but what Lester designed. And we saw that in the bowl game too. Kamari, TJ, and Jazz were all good. I mean, like
Yeah,
24 carries for 173 yards and a rushing touchdown, I think.
yeah,
So
the running game was super effective in the bowl game. And there was absolutely no Caleb, and you don't want to say they didn't miss a beat, but they were still really effective without him. So that was a really positive sign for next season.
so that will maintain and for them all to be productive is really big because are well, one, are they gonna be able to stay happy with that production and sharing that production, or are they gonna be itching for more? Right? So and to not have Ladell Betts around, to have a guy come in that didn't recruit them, we'll see how things go in this spring window. That's something that I'm watching for sure. Just given that amount of talent, and then you add Max White's in the fold still too as a walk-on, and then Nathan McNeil coming in. That's another point I wanted to make. Not losing any recruits because of this. McNeil already signed, already on campus, so he's not going anywhere. They didn't have a 26 commit at running back. So really the way I see it, only one of them is still a possibility that they've offered to this point. So that gives a guy who's coming in the opportunity to start to mold the room, so to speak. With the 26 class and start to build relationships himself and potentially go after the same guys. I mean, Liddell, if I remember right, said he came in and looked at those that they'd offered and decided who he was going to continue to pursue in 21 and then went his own way. But um, yeah, I mean, Ross, I guess I'm curious. Have you thought if you've thought or come to any names that come about any names that stick out to you? Because I think the consensus right now is Albert Young. That's what it seems to be on Twitter, and that's a name that we've talked about too, and it makes sense. So anything that sticks out to you other than Albert Young, or what do you think about him too?
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. I think the Albert Young thing is if you're just looking to kind of connect dots, it's one that makes sense because he ticks a lot of the same boxes that Ladell did. He's a former Iowa running back, had a good Iowa career, had some time in the pros, not as long as Ladell, obviously, or as successful, but he knows what it's like in the NFL still. He's done some coaching, not more of a not like coaching on a he's coached at a team level, but also just like individual um training, I guess. So he's got some of those same characteristics. He's a guy Iowa fans know well. He's very pro Hawkeyes. So I think he's definitely an option. Um, I see, where I was going, when you look at some of their recent hires, they've tended to be either former players. So if that's the case, I think he's the former player with the resume that certainly fits the best. There aren't other former running backs out there that have anywhere close to the resume he does. Or they're an internal hire, like we saw putting Bud Meyer at the wide receiver coach position. If they go that route, then, I think Jason Manson is the obvious choice, probably the only realistic internal choice. And then there's just kind of the left field choice, which is kind of where Tim Lester came from. That was not a guy we really had on our radar at the start of that offensive coordinator search. He came on there as the search progressed, and it ended up being something that made sense, and then it ended up obviously last year it worked out quite well, I think, in year one. So, you could definitely see, I think, something like that again. And, speaking of Lester, like how much power or how much say does he have in this hire as well? Is he going to push for Bath, his former guy that he's worked for, who's been a running backs coach for him? Is that something he wants to do? Is there somebody else he's, really interested in that he's worked with before or something? Is this going to be a quote unquote Lester hire or a Ferentz hire? A lot of question marks. So I'm really curious to see which direction they go. I don't, we're so early in the process right now, and I don't think we've seen a lot of smoke in any one particular direction. I think obviously the Twitter conversation is loudest around Young, but I don't know if that's the most. I don't know that he's necessarily a front runner right now.
Sure, he might be to the fan base, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, but it is a name to watch because he does have the Iowa connections, because he does have experience coaching, because he does have experience in the NFL, right?
Yep.
Um, and I mean, you read my article about him being a possibility. He's
Yep.
coached on college staffs. He's been in fellowship roles, intern roles with NFL teams. So I do think he has the pedigree
Yeah.
to be in that position. And I think if he were to take a running back coach position, it would be at Iowa because he is still a ride or die Hawkeye, right? Like it's
Yep.
still all over his social media. He'll tweet about it from time to time too. So I think based on what we have as far as a picture, as far as names that make sense, he's probably the one that makes the most sense, right? But you mentioned the internal hire, Jason Manson, a guy that I think is one to keep an eye on, the director of player development, I think is what his technical role is. But and then you mentioned Mike Bath, former member of Lester's staff at Western Michigan. But the other thing that I think we need to keep in mind is that Iowa can probably go get any G5 coach they want, any
Yeah.
FCS coach they want, whether it's a running backs coach or maybe an offensive coordinator from the FCS level. Probably not an offensive coordinator G5 level, but somebody who's been able to put together some level of ridiculous, production at that level. Um, I thought for a moment, because of ties to you and I and the fact that that staff moved on, Ateef Austin was the running backs coach at Northern Iowa, but now he's the running backs coach at Stetson, which is routinely a really bad program. So I don't think Iowa's going to be poaching him anytime soon. But just to think of names at any point in time, you never know what could happen. I mean, Iowa State went and got Ryan Clanton, right? So um, there lots of possibilities yet. I'm sure, like Lester was not on anybody's radar until towards the end for the Hawkeyes. That may very well happen again, and I'm, you don't want to rush because you want a coach there for junior day, right? That's not what you want to do. You want to make the right hire,
Right.
but you want the right hire to be done before spring ball.
Yes.
No dragon feet here on this one.
No.
So
This cannot be a 2 month process or anything like that, for
no,
sure.
no, it's got to get done. But we will keep tabs on that at Hawkeye Beacon. If you're not a premium subscriber, you can do that today. iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. We'd love to have you over there with us. Now, before we get out of here, women's basketball, they play at Michigan tonight. These next two games going to help determine their standing in the Big Ten tournament. We're not talking about if they make the Big Ten tournament like the men who just lost by 20 to Illinois. We're talking about when they make the Big Ten tournament. So I think tonight is probably the most up in the air game just based on the standings and what we've seen. Michigan's a pretty solid ball club, but Wisconsin senior day at home on Sunday. I mean, you look at that record, 13 and 14, 4-12 in the Big Ten, and you assume that's an automatic win. But tonight will be competitive, and definitely help determine their standing come Big Ten tournament time.
Absolutely. If they can win both those games, they would be 10-8 in the Big Ten. There's a whole mess of teams around there, so it's kind of hard to say exactly where they would be, but somewhere in that 8 to 10 or 11 range, it looks like. I'm looking at the standings here. They're already 11th, I believe. Yeah, 11th at 8-8. Like you said, you don't want to look ahead, but you certainly do, I think, pencil in that Wisconsin game as a likely win as long as they take care of business as they should. So then it does come down to the game at Michigan tonight. And yeah, I mean, there's Michigan's 10-6, so they are, playing for a lot too. They're trying to stay alive for a potential double bye, I guess. Um, but yeah, I mean, Iowa could potentially get a single bye, I think, if they win out and things break their way. Um, I'm not sure, to an extent of if this team is the way we've seen them play over the last month, I don't know that they're looking for a particular seed and like a particular path through the Big Ten tournament. I don't know if there's a team, they for sure want to avoid necessarily. Um, they,
Well, other than UCLA, USC, and Ohio State.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you want to avoid those teams as long as possible. Basically,
Right,
you're going to have to go through them at some point if you are trying to win the tournament or whatever.
right.
Um, they did beat USC. Obviously it took some historically bad shooting from USC in the first half, so probably not going to happen again.
And it was
And
at
they
home.
and it was at home. Right, very true. They played UCLA and Ohio State tough. So, I'm not saying like, oh, Iowa doesn't have anything to worry about. They can beat anybody. Like that's not true. Like this is a flawed team. It's a good team, but it's not, the team last year that could walk into the Big Ten tournament and be considered one of the clear favorites to win it for sure. This team is not that. But what we've seen from them the last month is they can compete and play hard with anybody in the Big Ten. Like they've been neck and neck with all these teams, even if they don't, get the win in the end. So, yeah, I think if they can maintain that level, they should have a great chance to win tonight. Should certainly have, you know, really good chance to beat Wisconsin on the weekend. And then yeah, they go into the Big Ten tournament. And you just kind of see what can we do from there.
Right now, they're sort of middle of the bottom or bottom of the middle, so to speak, in the Big Ten. And if they stack up those two wins, they start to reach towards the top of the middle, if you will, or
Yep,
like the middle of the middle. So, obviously winning is good. So you get a couple more prior to the Big Ten tournament. You get a little bit more momentum going that way as well towards Indianapolis. And I mean, the Iowa fan base travels, right? They're probably going to travel better than Oregon. They're probably going to travel better than Illinois. They're probably going to travel better than Maryland. So some serious opportunity for because Iowa took over Minneapolis last year.
absolutely.
They'll probably take over Indy. And I mean, there's going to be Fever fans there, right?
Oh yeah,
And who's to say Caitlin doesn't show up? Like that place is going to be popping if that does happen.
for sure.
So definitely going to be watching that. Of course, the men still on the precipice of the bottom of the Big Ten. So we'll be keeping track of that as well, taking on Northwestern on a Friday at Evanston.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to talk about it in
No.
detail, and we shouldn't. But just to point out, that game is a big game for if they want to make the Big Ten tournament. I think they really need that game. If they don't get that game, it becomes pretty hard to see a path for them to finish in that top 15 and get into that Big Ten tournament.
Right. And Michigan State at home after that, followed by Nebraska on the road. It's not looking great for the end of this season, but of course, we shall see how it all shakes out. And we will wrap it up here on this episode of HawkCast. We appreciate you tuning in. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, again, do that today. iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Subscribe here on YouTube. Drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking. Who should Iowa hire as the follow up, as the replacement for Ladell Betts? Let us know down there in the comments. And of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe, leave that written review. Helps us out a lot, and we greatly appreciate it. For now, folks, my name is Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder, and we will see you next time.